Hello everybody, this is Constable here, and today I wanted to talk a little bit about what bow is good on Childe, because there has been somewhat of a little bit of confusion. Everybody says Rust is probably the best in slot for Childe, unless you have a refined Skyward Harp, and I think people are really sleeping on the Battle Pass weapon. So if we go take a look right here, it's a crit rate weapon, so this is just a great substat, and especially for budget players willing to drop the $10. And a lot of people kind of ignore the ability, but on a normal or aimed shot, attacks have a 50% chance. So basically, every 2 hits, you're pretty much guaranteed to do this. It'll create a cyclone, which will attract surrounding enemies. It doesn't really matter, just assume that it works in melee, dealing 40% of attack damage to these enemies every 5.5 seconds for 4 seconds. This effect can only occur once in every 14 seconds. So basically, you get 8 ticks, so 8 times 40%, you get 320% of your normal attack damage. And what is really interesting is if we go over here to Prototype Animus, this is a Refinement Rank 3 Prototype Animus, and it's on a hit, normal charged attacks have a 50% chance to deal an additional 360% attack damage to enemies within a small AoE, can only occur once every 15 seconds. Sounds very familiar, doesn't it? So if everyone's saying Prototype Animus is a top tier, free-to-play weapon, in fact, it's pretty close to being best in slot for a lot of Claymore users. The Viridescent bow is pretty much the same. It's dealing 320% damage instead, but again, it's a crit rate bow. So keeping that in mind, I think that sounds pretty good. Now, of course, Rust does work in Childe's melee form, and so I have a Constellation 0 Childe, and depending on how many constellations you have on Childe, his playstyle will change. But typically on a Constellation 0 Childe, if you're using him as a main DPS, okay, meaning you're going to keep him out on the field, like say 50% of the time, or 80% of the time, excuse me, you're going to be setting up on enemies with a charge attack to apply Riptide, maybe going in, meleeing a bit, and then when you come back out, generally you want to aim for maybe like 10 to 12 to 15 seconds on the cooldown for that, and then you'll mostly be doing ranged shots, or if you don't have the ability to stay in the same spot because you're fighting mobile enemies, you'll be going around doing your normal attacks or charged attacks. So that's for a main DPS Childe. For Constellation 0, I think a lot of people will recommend just not even using his bow form, just going in, hitting, ultimating, and then switching to your main DPS or your supports to fill in the gap for his downtime. So, and then if you have full Constellation, you're just going to be in melee form, like forever, because you will generate so much energy and be able to use your ultimate to refresh that, and then switch out to your supports and come back and just, again, hit in melee form. So with that, I think Rust is just so much better, just because you're in melee form constantly. You don't really lose out on getting the minus 10% damage on the ranged shots. But I did some math, I did some calculations, and Viridescent bow is pretty decent. It's a great budget option, and I think it's actually might be a little bit better than Rust. And let me show you how. So here we have a kind of bunch of calculations. I'll go through it very simply. So most people don't really have 90, but I'm sure this applies even going to 90. Most of the calculations are going to be the same, but I'm just going to assume level 80 Childe and a level 80 weapon stats without being ascended. So this means he's going to have 715 base attack, And I'm just going to assume right off the bat you have 60% hydro bonus damage. Now this is coming from having a hydro bonus damage goblet for your artifacts, and also a just from ascending him that hydro bonus. So you're looking at about 60% here, and this will be constant throughout both builds. So the main difference between the two builds is with the Rust build, you're looking to just stay in melee form the whole time, hit people, apply Riptide, do your ultimate, deal a ton of damage. So with Rust, you get 37.7% attack. Okay, and you're looking at an artifact set of maybe 2-piece Gladiators and 2-piece Noblesse Oblige. This is subject to change when the artifacts come out. It seems like there was a leak on Reddit that it was 15% Hydro bonus damage, and then after using an elemental skill, that'd be doubled or something. So that would probably be best in slot for both. But as of right now, as of 1.1, for someone using Rust, we're looking at a 2-piece Gladiators, 2-piece Noblesse Oblige. For the main stats, we're looking for attack percent, hydro percent. This is going to be standard for both builds. But because you don't have a crit rate artifact, and depending on how many domains you've gone, I haven't spent any Primogems on doing resin refreshes, so I just hit AR 45 the other day. So this artifact is up for grabs. It can be attack percent, which arguably is not as good because if you don't know, attack percent is additive, and this will play a big part into our calculations. But we have crit rate and crit damage as well. This is going to probably create lopsided stats, but I'm just going to say if you get lucky on your rolls and you've managed to balance out your crit rate and your crit damage without using a crit rate weapon, you're going to be looking at about 50% crit rate and 100% crit damage, like max. I think this is going to take a while to achieve, like maybe a week or two of farming to be able to reach these ratios. And again, you're looking for a 1-to-2 ratio, but it's going to be lopsided because if you go for a crit rate or crit damage artifact, obviously that's going to overpower one or the other. And you have a lot of attack percent, keeping in mind that he has only 715% base attack, so this is your weapon. Both weapons have the same base attack, plus, just a base attack from the character itself. All these attack percents are only going to be working off of this 715. Okay, so total attack, you can pretty easily hit 2,000, but if you don't have attacks percent substats, you're looking maybe at around 1,800. But if you have a lot of attack substats, or you rolled attack substats for your on your Hydro Goblet or whatever, you can look at maybe an upwards of 2,200 for your total attack. So in my calculations, I use the average of that, 2,000, pretty simple. And you're pretty much looking to do your basic attack combo. You could use your charged attack, but it will be less. So if you do 2 rotations, meaning 6 attacks on a 12-second cooldown, so let me demonstrate that for you real quick. So I'm going to kind of attack up this hill. So that's 1. And when I go back to cooldown, that's about 12 seconds right there. So keeping that in mind, you have a 12-second cooldown, so that you spent about 6 seconds in melee form to do 2 rotations, the basic attack combo. You're going to do 1.6, so that's the Hydro bonus damage, times all these multipliers from a level 6 E skill, level 6, okay? And then this will simplify to 756.32% of your attack when you're dealing damage. Okay, so now this is total attack, not base attack. So this will be applied to the total attack. Now your Rust bonus damage is going to be another 40% at Refinement Rank 1. The reason why I'm working with Refinement 0 weapons is simply because Viridescent and Rust actually scale similarly. So you get to 0.8 versus the Viridescent, you get to 0.8, and actually refining Rust, so because the attack percent, this 40% or 50% if you refined it, or all the way up to 80%, only applies to your base attack. So the difference between 0.4%, 0.4 of 715 to 0.8 of 715 is like pretty negligible. So obviously once it plays into the greater attack formula, it will benefit a bit, but a lot less than people think. So then we have the base total damage. This is without taking into considering crit rate and crit damage, because remember, going with a Viridescent build will yield higher crit rate, and going with a crit damage artifact will create better ratios. So you're looking at about 37,000 damage. That's quite a bit. And your true total damage, you're looking at 55,000 damage. Okay? So it's pretty good. Childe is an absolute beast in his melee mode. But let's take a look at the Viridescent build. So under the Viridescent Hunt, we have a 25.1% crit rate at level 80. And the artifacts that you're going to go here for is the Wanderer's Troop. And the reason for this is you're going to be able to use charge attacks. You can now use charge attacks. Your charge attack on your bow is going to be pretty good. So even if you accidentally switch to him just 3 or 4 seconds before he goes off of cooldown because you messed up your timing, no worries. You can 100% do charge attacks with Rust. Obviously that 10% is going to hurt. You can still do damage, but it's less forgiving shooting with a bow on Rust. So now that we have the Wanderer's Troop, we have artifacts. Is going to be pretty simple. You have a crit rate in your weapon, so you can put crit damage for your final artifact slot, no problem. You're looking at have an average crit rate of 70% and a crit damage of 140%. You can reach this relatively easy as long as you get a couple rolls on the substats. So your total attack is going to be significantly lower. You're looking at 1600 to 2000. So on average 1800, which is what I will use for my calculations. So you have a charge attack damage. So again, allow me to demonstrate here. We'll wait for this to go on cooldown. So you can actually pull off 1, 2, 3, 4 charged attacks, and you will have a cooldown of about 11 seconds. So you can actually pull this off more often than just doing a basic attack combo. And again, you want to be using charge attacks to make use of your Wanderer's Troop set, which gives a 35% damage bonus to all charged attacks, whether he is in melee form or in ranged mode. So for the damage here, your total, it's only going to be 307% per rotation versus the 750% per rotation of the basic attack combo. But as you can see in our total damage, we will be multiplying that by 4. So Viridescent, I calculated independently. This is just going to be added, and assuming you're swapping him every 10 to 15 seconds, you should pretty much always get a proc of Viridescent whenever you're swapping him back in. This means that without that, he's only doing 29,000 damage doing this charge attack rotation. Could do more if you wanted to go for, say, 5 and end on like a 13-second cooldown. So there's that. But I'm going to keep this at 11 seconds versus this 12 seconds just to make my point that Viridescent is actually pretty good. Now you have a base. Now for your total damage, your crit rate is going to be significantly higher. Again, by 20%, really. And this will... you have this much damage, plus the Viridescent damage now I'm now adding after the fact, and you end up with 61,000 damage. And guess what? 61,000 damage versus 55,000 damage for a combo that you can pull off, technically more often than this rest build. So if you want to throw in an extra charge attack, that's going to be even more damaged. So that is my calculations for a C0 Childe at that playstyle. Obviously, if you're going to be using melee form more often, you're simply going to get more value out of it because each attack is going to get this extra damage versus Viridescent, which is just flat damage every 14 to 10 seconds. So with that will be my video. Again, I think Viridescent is actually a really good bow, and I think a lot of people are definitely sleeping on it. It's a wonderful bow, especially for Childe, who's just going to be melee anyways. But for any DPS, you can kind of see the advantages of Viridescent. Some counterpoints people might make are, oh, well, this Viridescent build, you're using Wanderer's Trope. What if you use Wanderer's Trope for the Rust build? You are going to get, some more damage, but with the amount of attacks and the fact that the base attack combo damage is going to be doing more damage than 2 charged attacks, you're simply not going to get as much value out of a Wanderer's Trope on a Rust build versus a Viridescent build. So, and then again, like, if you go for a 2-piece Gladiators, 2-piece Noblesse Oblige on a Viridescent, I think it'll still be okay, just slightly worse. So, that concludes my analysis for these two bows. Let me know if I made any mistakes in the comments or if you like this analysis, and give me a like and subscribe. Thank you.